What's going on, guys? Duelist Crown Tournament 17 has just wrapped up, and if you guys are new to the channel or new to Hat format, this is one of the online Hat format tournaments that's free to enter, unlike the ones that I usually talk about that are held through the Hat Alliance Discord server, which I highly suggest you checking out if you're interested in Hat format. I'll have all that information linked in the video description. You can find a link to that Discord server. It has a little over 3,000 Hat format fans and people who really enjoy Hat format, and we're trying to grow that group and the community much bigger. But this one was actually held on the Format Library Discord server, which, if you guys know anything about retro formats, Format Library is a website that, has basically every retro format all the way up to modern that you could possibly think about. It's an archive of all the different data from online events, as well as a lot of older information from back in the day, YCSs and different stuff like that. And so this was one of those events. And as usual for this video, I want to talk about the tournament breakdown, everything from the number of players to, what decks entered, and look at the top 8 deck lists from this event and just all the stuff to do with it. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So for this event, there were 40 players, which honestly is a pretty solid number. It's a little less, or a good amount less, than a Moraltech monthly, but it's also a lot more than some of the smaller 15 to 20 man tournaments. So it's kind of that good right in between. And here we have the the deck representation. So what decks actually entered this event out of the 40 players? There were 7 Artifact Traptrix variants and 7 Geargia. So for once, finally, the Artifact Traptrix and Geargia evening out. For a while, we were having where Artifact Traptrix might have a bit more, or Geargia might have a bit more, but here we actually see an even split, so always nice to see, and obviously taking up the 2 biggest chunks on the slice. After that, there were 5 Mermail, 4 Harpie, which honestly is really, really interesting given, this deck doesn't even see that much representation in other events. From time to time, we'll see maybe 1 pop up here or there, but seeing 4 and actually being right behind Mermail in terms of representation is very interesting. And maybe it's just people are wanting to test this deck out more, or with, Hat format growing in popularity, people think back to, Harpie as a pretty fun deck during this time period, though it has its own set of struggles, but we'll probably talk a little more about that in just a little bit. After that, tied with Harpie is actually Lightsworn Ruler, so kind of in the same boat where this deck is just kind of a fan favorite deck, even though it's considered slightly a lower tier deck in more modern Hat format, though more people have been wanting to play with it. It's definitely a fun deck. It's very high roll, so for modern players who maybe played Tierleman and stuff, it kind of has that same feel of a gamble deck that, depending on how well your mills are, can kind of be how good you can play with it. After that, 3 Artifact Thunder. This deck just came off of a big win in another event, and I've talked about it before. A really cool deck. It has a very, dedicated fan base, and it is a very strong deck. After that, there was 1 Constellar. I'm not entirely sure if this was pure or Constellar Artifact, which it usually is. There's Constellar Fire Fist, so this one just says Constellar, so maybe that was pure. After that, 1 Gadget, 1 Frog OTK, which is pretty cool to see. I've mentioned in the past that I do want to do a Frog OTK deck profile. I'm just waiting for some copies of Des Frog, because I got rid of mine when they were a bit up in price because of Edison and stuff, and I just have never got more since. After that, there was 1 Artifact Laval, which I can't even... No, I guess there was recently 1 event where someone brought Laval, so I guess, just people still testing with it. Maybe it was the same player. I'm not entirely sure. After that, 1 Ghost Strick, 1 Madolche, 1 Artifact Gravekeeper, 1 Chainburn, 1 Artifact Agent, and 1 Sylvan. And so kind of looking at this, something that's been very weird to me is people just have not been bringing Spellbook. Spellbook used to top almost every event, or not every event, but, a handful of them, every other event. or we'd at least be seeing kind of in the same range as like Mermail, for example, in terms of representation, where usually it would be, you know, pretty close to tied with Mermail. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. It was kind of like the Artifact Traptrix versus Geargia matchup in terms of representation, but with Spellbook. And here we don't see any Spellbook at all. We don't see any Infernity, which isn't the most unheard of nowadays. And the other thing is we don't even see any other. Usually there's like a slice on here that's an other slice, and that has to do with, you know, decks that are just pile decks or new decks to the format. And so we don't see anyone really testing anything that hasn't seen some form of representation in any of the tournaments. So that, I think, is kind of cool. But at the same time, you know, me personally, I really like when there's some like cool innovation going on and stuff like that. And so there definitely is innovation in these decks, but nothing like brand new in a sense, if that makes sense. Hopefully you guys get exactly what I'm saying here. But you guys will have to let me know what you think of this top breakdown in the comment section. Definitely let me know your opinions on that. And moving into the top 8, there were actually 3 Artifact Traptrix variants that made it to the top 8. So out of 7 that entered, there were, you know, almost half that made it to top 8, which is very impressive. And from my understanding, all 3 of these are actually different versions of Artifact Traptrix. And I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into the placings for the top 8. After that, there were 2 Geargia, so, you know, 7 entered, 2 were able to top, which isn't bad at all. There was the 1 Sylvan, so, you know, out of the whole event, there was 1 Sylvan player, and they did top this as well. The Frog OTK actually did manage to top, which I can't think of the last time Frog OTK actually got a top, so I'm really excited to look at that deck list. And lastly, one of the Harpie, was there 1 Harpie or was there, oh no, there was 4 Harpie. So actually one of those managed to squeak in there as well. Well, maybe it was like a top placing. We will have to see in a moment. But overall, pretty cool top 8. And so let's go and take a second and look at where those decks actually placed and the pilots behind them. First and foremost, congratulations to all the top 8 that we actually see here. I just want to get that out of the way so that I'm not, you know, saying it after each person. It really is, you know, very nice to see everyone who enters these events. And also just, it's really impressive to get to the top of these events, given there are so many dedicated H.A.T format players and so many of these players we've seen in the top cuts before. And it really shows how much effort they put into this. So congrats again to all the players. In first place was Tempest playing Geargia, and I believe this was Geargia Hands. And from my understanding, they went completely undefeated in Swiss and then completely undefeated in Top Cut to actually take down this event. So super, super impressive. Tempest is not anyone, again, a lot of these players aren't anyone who are new to topping or winning events. So really cool to see that. In second place is Lear Tactico. Again, I've talked to them before, very nice person, and they have really been trying to get that first place. Here they did get second place, and they are one of the Artifact Traptrix decks. They were on H.A.T. So the thing with them is they're also, well, actually, we'll talk about it more once we actually get into the deck profiles and stuff, but I actually do know their list for the most part, given they didn't change anything too much up, and so really cool to see them here. In third or fourth was the Frog OTK and Sylvan. So here we had Spiral on Frog OTK and Sylvan Spieler on Sylvan. The Sylvan, I believe, had just recently topped another event as well, of course, with Sylvan. And so I'd be interested to see if their list is super similar to the last one. I remember it decently well, because it wasn't that long ago again. And in terms of Frog OTK, yeah, I don't even know really what to expect. I think it was Lancer Frogs, kind of, but more so Frog OTK. But again, yeah, we'll talk more about that once we actually see the list. And then after that, 5th through 8th was Big Bert on Harpie. I know Big Bert likes to play Harpies, as well as they're known for like Battling Boxer, and I know at one point they were playing like Mermail, Constellar, like they're kind of all over the place with what they test, but I definitely know them for playing Harpie, so really excited to see what type of innovations and lists they went with for this event. After that, we have Falco, another, great player on one of those Artifact Traptrix decks, and this one, I believe, was actually the Counter Fairy Artifact deck. I'm not sure if they were playing hands or more so going with hand traps or something, but that is another deck that we don't really see that often, especially, topping these events. So I personally am a big fan of that. I know a lot of people really like Counter Fairy, so that will be very exciting to see. After that, again, this is in 5th through 8th, was Ghost Rider playing Geargia. I'm pretty sure, usually from the other tops I've seen from them in hat format, this is going to be Traptrix Geargia, or more so just pure Geargia with a couple Mermelios mixed in. So again, I've seen their list. It usually changes little bits and pieces throughout all these different tournaments. We will see if it's stayed the same or if there's been any changes to it. And lastly is Nicholas Nicholas, I'm sorry if I'm not even going to try your last name or part of your name. I apologize. And they are on Artifact Traptrix. I believe they're actually just on Hat. So the hand Artifact Traptrix. So pretty cool to see, again, 3 different Artifact Traptrix variants. The Frog OTK and Sylvan made it pretty far. Even Harpie made it pretty far. So just in general, really cool turnout. And I mentioned this in the last video I did, but this one, instead of going through the card by card, I'm instead just going to talk about what stuff was different. You guys can let me know in the comment section if you prefer when I go through the card by card. I know some people like to just put on these videos before bed or when they're driving, and sometimes me going through the card by card actually gets them, more of a mental idea of what the deck looks like, versus other people just want to hear me talk about what's different in the deck. Because, for example, Geargia, we've all seen the same kind of core of Geargia a million times, or same with, Hat or something like that. So in this one, I am going to try to test out just talking about some of the card choices and stuff like that, rather than actually going through the card by card. And in no means, if I cut one of the, profiles kind of short, no disrespect to the player. For example, how I mentioned like Sylvan had recently topped. If I had recently gone over their list and there's not a lot of differences, I might not talk about it for that long. But again, no disrespect. Congrats to all these players here who actually, made top 8. And let's get into those deck profiles. All right, so here we have the Geargia Hands first place deck list, and right away, nothing stands out too much for me. This deck looks pretty much what you'd expect. I've talked about this in technically what would now be, yesterday or the day before's video. This event wrapped up technically today, but it's probably not going to come out till tomorrow. So technically this event happened yesterday, or finished up yesterday, I should say. And that's just because by the time I got to recording this after locals, it was already pretty late. And so I had already put out another video. But this list looks pretty much what you'd expect, 3 Fiendish Chains and 2 copies of Breakthrough. They are on the hands build, so obviously they are choosing to play 3 Soul Charge. Other than that, 3 MST is pretty much what we saw the other day with this list too. The other thing is, again, some builds have gone back and forth with playing 3 hand traps, whether that's 2 Crows and a Max C, or 2 Max Cs and a Crow, or any combination really. And the last couple lists we've seen have just been on 2. So seeing that is, pretty much what we've been expecting. What I do find a little interesting is in the side deck here, we see 3 copies of DNA Surgery. For the last couple events, we actually haven't seen that many lists on this, but I think that's also maybe because, now that I'm thinking back, the lack of Bujin as well is something we didn't really see in the breakdown. I forget, did anyone even bring it to this event? Usually this is a very good card against Bujin as well as against Spellbook. And again, we didn't see any Spellbook, but it is a cool card to see back in the side deck here. Also, I guess technically it can counteract if your opponent is on this, given, sometimes players will play this against Geargia because by changing the typing, it locks you out of being able to, say, go into Gear Gigant or really get your advantage out of it. But other than that, everything for the most part looks pretty nice. We do see the extra copy of Max C, so they have the 3 as well as the 2 crows. And usually when you think about Geargia, they do play the Cycle Reader as the 3rd copy of Crow since it's searchable. And we've also, again, been seeing a little bit more of a single copy of Needle Sealing in the main. And the 1 copy of Trap Stun, I guess, is also something that's a little bit different, just given a lot of times Geargia will play copies of Wiretap. But I guess in a sense, Trap Stun does just blanket everything, and when you are maining 3 copies of MST, you kind of have a lot of ways to deal with spell and traps, especially when you also have the hands if need be, given your opponent doesn't like Dweller or Black Ship of Cornu or anything like that. Other than that, again, it just looks like a pretty standard list, and there's nothing wrong with that. It did what it needed to, and, sometimes a deck just works. I guess one other thing to note is I don't see any copies of Dark Hole in the main or side deck. Usually in a lot of decks, they will choose to either main or side it, and that just sees there's not one here. But they are on the Book of Moon, which we've seen a little bit more, and it makes sense in Geargia especially. And yeah, not a whole lot to say, so let's just move on to the next list. Next up, we do have the Cat list, and obviously being the Card Car Artifact Traptrix list, and so Lure likes to usually max out on artifacts. Ever since I had talked to them forever ago, they have always just really liked playing 6 artifacts. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it, because a lot of times most decks will either choose to go double Beagle Tack, plus 3 copies of Moral Tack, or they'll go for a smaller package of like 1 Beagle Tack, 3 Moral Tack, or they'll go like 1, 3, and 1. So he likes to, max out and go with all of them, which, it's fine. If it works for them, it works for them. And here we see them in 2nd place. So obviously it is working. The 3 copies of Card Car, which makes sense given they're not on like H.A.T, so with like the hands or anything. And the cool thing is with Thunder Dragon, and they're doing Thunder Dragon without the copies of Eccentric Boy that some builds will do, so more so they're just using this as a kind of way to deck thin in a sense, being able to, say, discard it to add 2 other copies, and by having extra discard fodder, you do have access to Divine Wrath, which is a very powerful card, being a counter trap to discard cards to negate monster effects, so that's really cool, as well as it's just a light level 5, which helps you make things like Pleiades at times. Also just, being able to even have the interaction where if you really needed to, you could go Thunder Dragon, discard, add 1 Thunder Dragon, and then discard that one to add the 3rd copy, in which case you can then soul charge them back and make a Pleiades or any other rank 5 for that matter. And at that rate, you still have 1 in hand if you do have the Divine Wrath. There's just so many other points of interaction where Thunder Dragon really works, and that I think is really cool. I've messed around with this in a few different decks, and just having it in this type of deck where the level 5 light synergy is also relevant is so nice, as well as they are choosing a full package of Traptrix monsters, so not cutting down on the Mermelios or Dioneas. Some builds will go with, like, say, 1 Dionea and the 3 Mermelio just because they want to, not really see the extra brick there. But given they aren't playing any hand traps or anything and instead are playing, the Thunder Dragons, it sort of makes sense. You want to always have a way to grind a little better, as this deck can sometimes struggle against hands usually, and just being able to outgrind them. So Dionea definitely can help with that. Other than that, I mean, they're on 3 copies of Call of the Haunted, which makes sense for the bigger artifact package. And other than that, yeah, no, I mean, the deck looks great, and I really appreciate, again, the Thunder Dragon. I can't speak how much good into that. In terms of the side deck, we're seeing 2 and 2 on the hand traps, which I always like 2 and 2 ratios, and at least at bare minimum, they are, having these. Some people have actually cut like Crow or Max C in certain instances, and I just personally can't get with that, especially in Cat, where the card cars can draw you into the hand traps. I personally like to main the hand traps, but again, they needed to make space for that. The 1 copy of Thunder King, obviously the, logo for my channel, my favorite card of all time. Seeing that's pretty cool. You don't see it that often in hat format, but it is such a good card, and there's not necessarily a reason why it wouldn't, other than the fact that there's so many cards that kind of out this, but in certain matchups, being able to summon this and back it up with things like the Sanctums or even Divine Wraths or anything like that, this card is a House 1900. Just a really cool card, and also they are on the Malcats. This is a card that I always forget exists, but I always like to think that it does. I don't think that makes any sense to you guys, but such a good card, being able to just blow up all the back row, and when they're on a heavier artifact count, then you definitely want to make sure you have extra ways, if need be, to blow up your own back row in, situations where you're kind of clogged on that, and just in general in any other matchup against, decks that have a lot of back row, this card just kind of can win you the game. The extra deck doesn't look terrible either. They're choosing to go with the Heartland Draco. Oh no, they're doing the Heartland Draco and Cowboy. I didn't see that for a second. I was going to say they're choosing this over the Cowboy, but here we see they actually are on both, not playing the copy of Emerald that some builds will play, because I could almost see a situation where if you had gone for your Thunder Dragons, being able to, say, if you had one in hand still, shuffle some back and then be able to reuse this. Though I feel like at that point you kind of run the risk of redrawing into one. But yeah, so I guess other than that, maybe like Zen Mayo is something that Cat usually plays that I don't see in the extra. But besides that, I mean, the Lavalval Chain is always nice, being able to stack a Dionea when you have already had a Mermelio in rotation, or even being able to just send an artifact or something when you have Call the Haunteds and stuff. So just so many uses for that as well. And overall, the list looks good. So let's move into the next one. So next up is the Frog OTK deck, and yeah, I do see 1 copy of Lancer, Sea Lancer in here. As I mentioned, some builds will play, a little bit more, but usually 1 is pretty standard in this build, and this deck kind of just plays a slow, grindy game, and then just kind of OTKs you once all the setup is done. The main culprit for that is going to be Inferno Reckless Summon, which says you can only activate this card when 1 monster with an attack of 1,500 points or less is special summoned to your side of the field, while there's a face-up monster on your opponent's side of the field. Special summon all cards with the same name as the summoned monster from your hand, deck, and graveyard. In face-up attack position, your opponent selects 1 monster on their side of the field and special summons all cards with the same name from their hand, deck, and graveyard. So the idea behind that is, cards like Ronin Tonin are treated as Des Frog, and a lot of the frogs in general are treated as that. So the idea is you would say banish a frog, summon a Ronin Tonin from grave, use this and be able to summon your copies of Des Frog, which are level 5s, which help you, go into, say, Volcasauruses to now your opponent has a bunch of monsters. You can burn them for that and then be able to go into, say, Gaia Dragon and then poke over and, just OTK them. There's also a lot of other ways. You have your Mother Grizzlies to help you float into stuff. For example, being able to make sure your swap frogs and stuff can start dumping your frogs is really important. They play a lot of back row removal with 3 MST and 3 copies of Trap Stun, which makes sense. Trap Stun usually is played in heavy combo decks like this, because when they want to, OTK you, they want to OTK you, as well as, the Inferno Reckless Summon sometimes does just work really well with Needle Sealing. For example, if your opponent summons a bunch of monsters, if you say have like set Des Frogs, you can just blow them out with that, as well as there's a lot of times where you just Inferno Reckless Summon your 2s and you have like a Gotchi that, you can detach a material so it's not destroyed. And at that rate, you're basically just blowing up your opponent's board and then having a bit of a wall set up. It's kind of interesting looking at the extra deck, actually, because a lot of builds will play like a second copy of the Gotchi or even a second copy of Gaia Dragon, because as I mentioned, if you're able to go into double fives at times with a whole bunch of different ways, for example, if you have like your Des Frogs plus like a Lancer, or even if, you know, there's different ways to get rid of one and bring one back, there's a bunch of different stuff within, so you can, in theory, go for that. Also, while this is an OTK deck, I've seen a lot of builds play Soul Charge in the past, and this one just doesn't play it at all, so it's definitely more dedicated to just being able to beat you as fast as possible. They're playing kind of a funny hands ratio, too, in the side. They're playing 2 copies of Ice Hand and the 1 copy of Fire Hand, and I'm guessing that's just to have a little bit more ways to poke through back row decks and stuff like that. Usually, I've said it before, you'll play more copies of the one that you actually have more of a problem with or want to beat more. And so it's kind of like funny ratios in terms of that. The Retaliating Seas, or not Retaliating Seas, Flying Seas, my bad. Just in general, a really good card against Infernity, Geargia, or any deck that Xyz summons a lot. We've been seeing a lot more Gadget pop up, so just a cool card there. And yeah, really, I feel like this is one of those decks you just kind of have to see in action to fully understand. So maybe I'll be able to, you know, get some gameplay and stuff to actually show you how this deck works. I've shown off a couple different Frog decks in the past, and you'll see the problem that sometimes this deck can face in terms of it can be a little bricky in a sense, even though, you know, cards like Max C help you, you know, get into your deck deeper, same with Duality, but the deck kind of, you know, it has to see the right combination of stuff into the right combination of stuff to actually fully work out, but really cool deck, and, you know, hopefully we'll see more of this in the future. Next up, we have the Sylvan list, and at a quick glance, I want to say this is the same build that they had just recently brought and topped with in the last event that I remember them topping exactly. It might have been 1 or 2 events ago. I'm not entirely sure. I think it was in the top 8. I think maybe like a 5th through 8th list. And I guess one thing that I'm noticing, though, is Divine Wrath. I don't remember them playing this. If they did, I'm just forgetting. But I feel like these were just Wing Blasts the last time, which maybe from, you know, maybe that's something they're just wanting to test here. We just had seen that in the Cat list as well from Lair Tactico, and, you know, maybe it's something they were wanting to test out, or maybe in their last run they were finding more problems with hands and stuff like that and kind of chose to go with this, or even against hand traps and stuff. This is something we don't really see in Sylvan much. I think usually you'll see more so like the Emptiness or even the Rivalries and stuff, but I think compared to it, I guess like this does set up your graveyard a little better in some of your rough hands where you need like a Soul Charge to be live or even a Miracle Fertilizer, because sometimes this deck can have a little bit of a slow start if it doesn't see, you know, its Field Spell plus, you know, one of those Reborn type cards or even a Lone Fire. And other than that, though, yeah, I want to say this list is basically the same. I remember seeing that they had been on the 3 Komashrumo and the 3 copies of Martial Leaf, as well as, you know, one of my personal favorites, the Peacekeeper. And I think almost every time I've seen them play, they've been on the Cherub Sprout, and I definitely remember the 1 copy of Super Solar Nutrient that was kind of teched in there. So yeah, nothing really crazy to talk about that. I don't remember their side deck too well, I'll be honest, but 3 Maxi and 3 Crow makes sense. The Lances that for a while back in the day, people definitely, you know, played Lances in the main, whether that was like, I think Hoban, for example, played, I think 1 in the main, and then a lot of people in recent time have also played with a couple of these in the main. Personally, I think it's really good, but I do like how a lot of their list is just 3 ofs. It's a really clean list, and it's kind of pleasing just to look at. They have the 3 MSTs, and then choosing 2 copies of Emptiness. I think this deck usually, if it's going to play Emptiness, should just play 2, because at multiples it is slightly repetitive. Also with things like your charities and stuff, it's really easy to get into it. This deck has crazy draw power and can kind of cycle through the deck really well. In terms of the extra deck, nothing really stands out. I think they've always been on like 2 copies of the Ulse, 2 Araya, and double Felgrain. And then, yeah, nothing else really standing out that I can tell here. They have the 3 level 8 Synchros and the Leo. And yeah, no, nothing much to really say with this one. It's a great list. So let's move on to the next one. Next up is Big Bert's Harpies, and the first thing I'm noticing is it looks like a very low monster count, and there's a lot of different routes people go in terms of the monsters. In terms of the actual Harpies, all the Harpie stuff and kind of related stuff makes sense. Usually the deck does play the 1 Zephyros, the double Cyber, and the 1 number 1. A lot of times it's 1 to 2 copies of Dancer, but most commonly 1, the 3 Chandler, and the 3 copies of Queen. All of that looks normal. I think it just comes down to what non-engine. I mean, also, I want to say that like Zephyros is like honorary engine, but in terms of like what else you play, sometimes we see people play, you know, Max C's, sometimes people play Crows. We've seen Sumner Monk is usually a really good card with Hysteric Sign, but it can lose a little bit harder to, you know, the decks that are playing like 3 Fiendish Chain and 2 Breakthroughs or 3 Breakthroughs. So we do see that, that they're not choosing to play that. I think in my build, I was playing 2 Crows just because it works with Icarus Attack. And here we see they aren't playing Icarus Attack, which some people like, some people don't. I think in my profile when I did it, I talked about how it's kind of like an iffy card. Maybe I forgot to mention it, or maybe I did that in one of the other deck profiles I did in the past. But in general, here we see Max C as the choice. And given the lower count of monsters and kind of how they're choosing to play this, here we see like the Wing Blasts and, you know, double Fiendish Chain and double Breakthrough, which we've also been seeing 2 and 2 in the last, event that I covered the other day. That's becoming a bit more common. So just given how this is with the Maxis, I would assume that this is a little more grindy than anything else. And also the fact that they are playing a slightly slower game when need be, instead of, for example, how I said the Ds that some people have tried with. Instead, we actually see duality. And that is kind of a neat thing, especially given if you can get to your engine faster, it's definitely, you know, a very plus for this, especially with Hysteric Sign. Being able to search 3 of your Harpies is always nice. And then also they are on the magical hats, which this has always been like a 50-50 type of card. I remember back in the day, I used to play this as well, and it is gimmicky, but it definitely gets the job done. Usually you're going to choose like a Hysteric Sign and a Breakthrough skill, so at bare minimum you're either searching 3 or, you know, you're getting a negate in graveyard, or I guess in general you're getting both of them in graveyard, which is always a very strong thing. And the Harpie party basically being a like searchable versions of what's it called, or not searchable, but copies of Soul Charge in that matter is really, really strong. And yeah, I guess actually, now that I think about it, here we do see a copy of Icarus Attack there, as well as the 3rd Maxi and the copies of Crow. So kind of cool, honestly, very minimalistic, I want to say, but at the same time, this deck is consistent in a sense. Being able to search 3 off of Hysteric Sign is just wild, and I always personally really like the builds that don't play the Harpie Pet Dragon or the Tempest, because they're just like extra bricks that the deck really, really doesn't need. So I actually really appreciate that they're also choosing that build as well. And to pair with that, they are on the double copies of Chidori and just the 1 copy of Zero Fine. That's like the same type of ratio that I was doing as well. The other thing to note is a lot of builds for a while were playing things like Instant Fusion as well as like Mavelus, and here we see that they aren't choosing that, and that kind of goes back to why I said it kind of feels like they want to play at a slightly like less like combo-y version of this deck, just because you don't, like, by playing it slower, especially without like things like Sumner Monk, you're not giving your opponent the chance to get pluses off of things like Max C. party. So this deck can actually, again, just play at that rate. At least that's how I feel in terms of when I see this. And so there's kind of something nice about that. It can be explosive when it needs to with the party, but it can also just take it slow and gain a lot of advantage. And from the traps that we see here, like I said, like Wing Blast, Double Fiendish, Double Breakthrough, this deck can be very grindy. Chidori is just a crazy card. Being able to just restack cards and just out things so easily. One of the just like best rank 4s that's kind of locked behind typing and stuff like that. But really good card. And overall, great list. It's really cool to see, and hopefully we will see more of this moving forward, and obviously of Big Bert as well as a player. Next up is the Counter Fairy artifact, and it looks like Traptrix. Oh, and hand traps. Wow. Okay, so this is definitely different from any version of the Counter Fairy deck that I've personally seen, at least as in terms of recent, because again, usually this deck does play more so hands. And yeah, here instead we are seeing a pretty good spread of hand traps in the main, 3 Maxis and 2 Crows. It sort of makes sense. This deck does want to be able to have hand traps, especially Maxis that can draw them into more traps. They are playing 5 artifacts as well, playing the 2 copies of Beagle Tack and 3 copies of Moral Tack, which makes sense. Only 2 copies of Pot of Duality is a little bit interesting, but I guess maybe in this version you do have more chances to actually play with like Dionea and the Mermelios and stuff, but it's kind of interesting to see that they're only on 2 copies of Duality. I feel like there's not really a downside to playing 3 unless it's exactly that situation or a soul charge play, but very interesting. The other thing is, in terms of the counter traps here, we see they are playing the 1 copy of Debunk. I believe I was playing 1 or 2 in my build. 3 copies of Drastic Drop Off, which is honestly a really good card. I think in mine I was playing 2. We see Forced Back, which is a card that you just barely ever see. I believe, I'll click on it real quick. It's negate the normal summon or flip summon of a monster and return that monster to the owner's hand. So really cool card there, as well as, you know, obviously we see the wiretaps, the warnings, the ones that make sense, even like Blackhorn. And this card I haven't seen in a long time, Heroes Rule 2. Negate the activation of a spell trap or monster effect, monster's effect that targets a cards in the graveyard and destroy it. Very interesting to see that. I can't even think of the last time I saw someone play this. So I guess in terms of that, it says specifically in the graveyard. So I guess it's a way to kind of be like Debunk in a sense and counter some of the other stuff. But I guess, does this, let me just reread this, that targets a card in the graveyard. So I guess this is also just a way to stop Soul Charge, or even maybe like Call the Haunteds and stuff. So really cool to see that. Other than that, like, I guess the list for the main deck at least looks and makes a lot of sense. Looking at the side deck, it's all one-ofs. I mean, obviously some of these complete other, you know, amounts in the deck. For example, we see the 2 copies of Debunk, which is the only 2 of in the side deck. But I mean, for example, like, where is it? Like, here's another Force Back. So obviously they're playing 2, but just seeing a lot of one-ofs in the side is kind of funny. For anyone wondering about the Dimensional Fissure, this card, during H.A.T format, if your artifacts are set in the back row and are destroyed, they will go to graveyard because they were destroyed as spell or traps. So this actually can be played in this deck. And just in general, very cool to see. I like the 1 random Malcat. The DDG is really cool to see. They are playing some extra trap hole cards because of the Mermelios and stuff. Very fun list, and really cool to see that this deck actually managed to do something. The extra deck, there's not really much to say on it. It looks pretty much what you'd expect from any sort of, you know, artifact Traptrix type deck. And yeah, no, really cool to see. You guys definitely should let me know what you think of this deck in the comment section. And let's move on to the next deck. I think it's the H.A.T list. Yeah, it was the H.A.T list, and here we see it's actually on 41 cards, and that's why it might look a little weird on the screen. I think the biggest thing, okay, so 2 and 2 on hands, I always like to see that, and they are choosing to actually main 3 copies of Max C. H.A.T is usually one of those decks that won't really play Max C or hand traps in general in the main. But we have seen, I think, Corey McDuffie's list from the NAWCQ during 2014 was, I think, playing 1 or 2 Max C, but usually decks don't go past that in this deck, but here we see they are playing 3, and they're playing a very minimalized engine for the Traptrix, only playing 2 Mermail and 1 copy of Dionea. That is really, really unique, and I'd almost be curious to see how they felt about this. I guess, you know, you do have extra normal summons with the hands, but this deck does look like it lacks a little bit of normal summons. And the other thing that, the more I look at this list, the more it's like so intriguing. They are playing the 1 double Cyclone here. They're playing instant fusions. So like for Madolche and the Ojama Knight, so having access to 5s or 4s if need be. They're playing 2 copies of Pot of Duality and 1 Upstart. So rather than playing like a 3rd or just 3 Upstart, they're playing 2 and 1, which is really funny. The 1 random dimensional prison, and yeah, 41 cards. So what looked like a pretty normal list at first is actually coming out to look very like bizarre, but I really like it. I always like when decks play like weird ratios and stuff. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that, but kind of funny to see. In terms of the side deck, nothing stands out. They're playing the 3rd breakthrough skill in the side, as well as the 2nd double Cyclone and the Mind Control. They're maining the Dark Hole. Transmigration Prophecy is sometimes sided. Nothing stands out there. Let's look at this extra deck real quick. Here's an example of how I said at the beginning that some will choose Heartland Draco or Cowboy. We are seeing that here. And yeah, they are on Dweller, they are on Exciton, they're on 101. So nothing standing out too much. They do have room for the Durendal. They are playing Volcasaurus. So yeah, no, I mean, they aren't playing Lavaval Chain, which, you know, as I mentioned before, isn't always something people like to go with, but they are on Triple Call the Haunted, so maybe you would have expected that a little more, but at the same time, given they do have to have room for things like the instant fusion targets, it sort of makes sense. And overall, really kind of goofy list, but I like it a lot. And this is the type of stuff that I just genuinely like to see, that people can top with some of the most unique decks in H.A.T format. So really nice to see that. Last up is Ghost Rider's Traptrix Geargia deck, and I already see something that's different from their usual deck. Other than being, you know, 41 cards, I don't remember if they usually go over 40, but the thing I am noticing is they are finally playing the copy of Geargiano. Usually, for the last couple times I've looked over their list, they actually weren't playing this, so I guess they finally decided to actually maybe give it a shot, or maybe they started liking it now, and so that's really cool to see. They're still on the 2 copies of Mermail. I'm pretty sure that's what their ratio has been. I don't remember them playing so many spells, but again, it has been a little while, and I've looked over so many different Geargia lists that I probably am getting it confused with another one, but seeing that they are on the triple Soul Charge, triple MST, and triple copies of Upstart is, you know, it sort of makes sense with the MSTs. We saw that in the other list, same with the Soul Charges, except the other list was playing the hands, and in here we're also seeing 3 Upstart, which some people just like for consistency. Nothing wrong with that. I know for a while they were playing a lot of trap cards. I think they were playing like 3 Wiretap at one point and 3 Blackhorn and some other stuff. And here we see no Wiretap at all in the main or side deck, which I guess makes sense if you're on the MSTs. Also seeing 0 copies of Breakthrough Skill anywhere in the list is something that I feel we haven't really seen in any sort of Geargia list, because how I always say, usually decks are going with some form of like 3 Fiendish Chain, 1, 2, or 3 copies of Breakthrough Skill, or the vice versa, but definitely playing both. So that is something that is a little different there as well. For some reason, the deck just looks good as well. I mean, Geargia is one of those decks that, when you think about it, they're playing like 3 Accelerator, 3 copies of Arsenal, your 3 armors. Like, they're playing a lot of just the consistency type cards, 3 Geargia gears with your 2 or 3 MK2s and the Geargiano. Like, it's just one of those decks that feels right how it's being played in almost any form of it. Like, even the Geargia Karakuri deck, when you look at it, it just makes sense. So there's not a whole lot to say about that. You know, they do play the deck a bit different from a lot of other people, but they see results with it. So obviously it's working. Looking at the side deck, Mind Crush is a card you don't see as often in Hat format, but it definitely is very good. For example, your opponent goes Duality and searches something, or even like a Mermail search something, or Spellbook, you know, a Blue Boy or something like that they search. There's plenty of opportunities to Mind Crush the opponent. Here we are seeing, you know, the DNA surgeries again, as I mentioned before. They are siding the extra copy of Blackhorn, which is always nice to see, and they are siding Crows. And yeah, nothing else really stands out to me. They do have the macro and defissure, so nice to see in terms of the extra deck. Nothing stands out. You know, Tempo is one of those cards that some people choose as their kind of flex spot in a sense. Like, some people will play this, some people won't. Are they playing Acid Golem? No, right? Okay, so they're choosing not to play Acid Golem, so maybe that was the flex spot because I see they are on the Zen mains, as well as the Soul of Silver Mountain and the Alucard, which is usually what, you know, a lot of the 3s are, as well as, you know, Acid Golem is just a way to, for example, out Felgrand or just other really big cards. It's a way to apply a lot of pressure, but we don't see that here. But other than that, everything looks good. Obviously, this deck has always played like 3 Geargigan and stuff. So, no, overall, it looks great. And again, congrats to all of these players. And that is it for this event. You guys can, again, let me know what you thought of the event as a whole in the comment section down below. And again, also let me know what you thought of this different style, where instead of going through the card by card for every single deck, I just talk a little bit more about the lists as a whole. Do you prefer this, or do you prefer when I go through every single card? Definitely let me know. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with that, you should definitely check out the last Hat format tournament review video I did to kind of see the different contrast in how I did that, and let me know what you think. And don't forget, if you want to play in events like these, definitely join the Hat Alliance Discord server. That information will be in the video description down below. Check that out, join that server, and play in some of these free-to-play online Hat format tournaments. And if you guys enjoyed this video and made it this far, please leave a like on this video, comment any questions or videos you want to see in the future, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out, share this video with your friends, and anyways guys, I will see you in the next video.